hey everyone, welcome back to another update on the ever-evolving Log4j situation from the people here at Sonatype. I'm Ilka, the field CTO here at Sonatype, and joining me today are Ax Sharma, developer advocate. Hey Ax.
Hi everyone.
Brian Fox, CTO and co-founder. Hey Brian.
Hi everyone.
And finally, I've got Steve Poole, developer advocate as well. Hey Steve.
Hi there. Hope everybody's doing good.
Brilliant. Well, we've got quite a lot of things to cover today. So let's start off by just launching directly into the situation with Log4j. So we're about 11 days in since the project had the issue. The world has been patching. We've seen a tremendous amount of publication traffic coming in and out of Central. And we now live in a world where the first confirmed breaches using Log4j have happened. So, Ax, why don't you start us off by talking about the breach that happened over at the Belgian government?
Yeah, absolutely. So they haven't released too much detail just yet, but we did know that Log4j exploits were being used by nation-state actors, right, to target with ties to China, Iran, North Korea. I'm just referring to the news report, right, targeting vulnerable systems. And just this week, Belgium's Ministry of Defense, they confirmed it this Monday that the cyber attack they've been hit with, it's due to a Log4j exploit. And this news sort of comes after, there were suspicions of Kronos also having been hit, but that was never confirmed. But this is a confirmed case.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, I don't know, Steve and Brian, what do you think? But just over the last couple of weeks, we've been saying, I think every attack that comes to light now is kind of suspect for Log4j. But, kind of seeing a government actor like that, come out and openly say that it was Log4j, that's kind of big news to admit, right? Quite a lot of, quite impactful for them to also say out that it's such a big institution that's been affected by this, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I agree. But I think it's really good because I think people have to, sharing that fact is good because it will show to everybody else just how serious this is, because you still have developers and businesses who aren't putting enough effort into patching. So I think this news and this disclosure, it literally is good for everybody.
Yeah, it kind of also shows the kind of the impossibility of the situation where it's literally a race against time. Because, for example, in the States, the Fed has issued an edict that essentially says that every single system that they run has to be patched by Christmas Eve, I believe it is.
Before 23rd, actually, 2 more days, you can say.
Yeah, so there's a lot of operations happening in a lot of places, and what I've observed certainly is the various cybersecurity centers at various countries across the world, especially in Europe, sending out actual notices to media saying, CEOs and executives, please plan this into your work stream. So this Belgium case, I think, is another example of how deep this sort of thing goes. It's not just something that you or me have to mind. It's pretty much an exercise for every single organization.
Yeah. But you also have to stay on top of the CVEs. I just want to interject this, right? I guess the Log4j vulnerability started out with 1 CVE, 2021 44228, and now we are we're seeing total of 4 CVEs. So it's hard to keep up because the remediation advice, I feel, kept changing as we have progressed.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, it started without a CVE.
Yeah.
That's the thing about this vulnerability. The original vulnerability. It's from everybody should be clear. This is a capability. What's being exploited is a capability that was in Log4j for since 2014, 2015, and it's only now just because a researcher pointed out how it could be exploited. So it's been around for some time. So I'm sure it's been exploited in the wild before now, but now that the researcher has pointed it out, we're now obviously trying to patch it. But it is, even so, it was still announced to the public before being announced to the Apache group. So that's why we were scrambling. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, that's that's the danger of any, or kind of the hard thing to understand about all of these sort of situations is you don't know what you don't know. There's always going to be bugs in software. For what it's worth, I mean, the Apache Foundation has been phenomenal at batting these off as the fixes come. I seem to recall one exchange in the developers list where something came in and it was literally seen to within minutes.
Yeah.
So it's not for the lack of wanting to create good software. It's just you don't know what you don't know. Attacks evolve over time, obviously.
Well, and as we've seen over the last couple of years, the bad actors are getting more sophisticated and are more able to make use of these vulnerabilities and discover them. So I think one of the big lessons from this particular situation is whatever people are doing to remediate it, and we know everybody is working really hard to do that. It's like, don't assume that this is just a one-off, and take a good hard look at how you are having to apply this remediation in the automation processes, detection systems, whatever. Learn the lessons, because when this happens next time, and it will happen next time, you need to be just as fast. So it's now is the time to start look very hard about how you do this, how you're patching.
Yeah, so speaking of remediation, Steve and Ilka, what kind of, I guess, like the statistics are you seeing? Because like the right version to be on, right, it's 2.17, that's the latest version, and for people on 2.12 branch, it's 2.12.3, which is yet to be released. But I guess if you wanted to sort of go over the download counts and stuff.
Yeah. So 217 is, I think, right now the canonical answer as being the latest one. And I'm sure there's some people who patched to 215 or 216 and are now having to go around the loop again, will be cursing, but it is 217. So what do we say also about the downloads? That URL.
Why don't we come back to that actually a little bit later, because before we got to that, there's one other case that I really wanted to actually dive in and then essentially talk about the numbers for the rest of the whole thing. And that is the Drydex Trojans that we've started seeing over in using Log4j. So, Axe, you kind of released a blog today that kind of deep dives into some of these. So why don't you walk us through kind of what's going on with this and what do we know?
Yeah, absolutely. So ever since the exploits came out, it's like super easy to trigger any sort of malicious hack using JNDI, on a vulnerable system that's using Log4j. So what ended up happening is, like, this week, this particular security research group, they are called CryptoLemus. I hope I said that right. They're seeing like this distribution of Drydex malware. Now, Drydex is a banking Trojan. So essentially, attackers, they'll like try to inject this malicious Java class on your system, right? If you're running like an older Log4j version, which is still vulnerable. And as soon as their command hits your server, right, as soon as it executes, like this malicious Java class, if it's a Windows system, it further plants Drydex Trojan, which can like very easily spread itself. If not, they'll drop MeterPreter, right, which is a part of Metasploit framework. So again, MeterPreter would give the hackers like remote control of your device and stuff. And again, both of these payloads can spread themselves, but the reason there's focus on Drydex in this report is because like Drydex has been known to be used before in ransomware infections, right? And yeah, essentially it started off as a banking malware to steal online banking credentials, but then further extended capabilities developed, and yeah, now it's used by like Evil Corp ransomware operations, for example. And same with MeterPreter, like it can be used to install ransomware, exfiltrate information, etc. And I say this because we know for a fact now, like malware gangs, like different kinds of, right, including ransomware actors, they're using these exploits. So it's not a theoretical risk anymore.
I guess actually, Brian, we had this discussion the last time we did this stream about the mutating vectors of attack. What's pretty interesting about this particular confirmed situation is that it's using the remote method invocation API rather than LDAP. So any thoughts or comments around what other APIs could be hiding that people could potentially leverage?
All of them.
Yeah.
I think that's why I didn't catch. Is that RMI still? It's not affected in 217, right? That was an exploit through 215, 216. Is that correct?
Yeah. 217 just turned it all off.
Right,
Effectively.
right, and that was the reason why, and that was, I'm not surprised, right? The LDAP implementation was sort of the alpha variant, if you will, and then there was JMS, and now there's RMI. All of those being triggered by the JNDI. The JNDI was the root cause of basically all of these challenges in this go around. That's not to say there won't be others, but I believe also they've turned off message expansion for all purposes as well, so that you won't cause messages to be expanded and potentially executed, right? So there's multiple things going there, but that was why 217 ultimately removed all of the JNDI capabilities. And I believe the same was done in Logback 129 for the same reason that, you can't guarantee all the possible scenarios. You can't filter the whitelist enough. Most people don't need that capability, so just rip it out. And that's what's happening, and I've been sitting here looking at the stats and thinking about this as we've kind of been talking through it, and I can make this a little bit bigger here, and where are we here, right? And so we can see that I think we talked about this the other day, that the world updated to 215 fairly quickly, and then they followed along to 216 and 217. There is this discouraging, as of last count, 40% of the downloads are pre 215 vulnerable versions, and that it's on a slow upward trajectory, but too slow, right? So we're looking at ways to shine more lights on this and how to try to track down where that usage is coming from. So on the resource center, we can provide the log. Yeah, the link is at the bottom. We'll probably have a new visualization soon that will start to show popularity of components that we know are dragging Log4j vulnerable versions along with it. There are some pretty big offenders out there, and I think in the way that we're tracking as the world moves to the patched versions of Log4j, as those other projects make their updates, I think we're going to want to shine a light and get people to remember to update those other things as well, because that's probably bringing in a whole bunch of these downloads that are known to be vulnerable. The other thing that's not so happy is if we were to go back and revisit this, all of that yellow is now considered to be vulnerable as well. And I think in some cases, all of the 216, the teal color, I think one could make an argument that all of that is effectively vulnerable as well. So, there's kind of two stories going on here that we keep kind of taking a step back, that as we uncover more and more vulnerabilities, the iceberg that is safe to stand on keeps getting chipped away and getting smaller and smaller, right?
Yeah.
So I think we're going to have to think about how we maybe recolor these, because they're not all happy colors anymore. That all changed yesterday.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the confusing situation. By my calculation, we're at 6 different CVEs that are kind of affecting various different logging frameworks.
So 5 at yeah. With the potential 6, we don't know yet, but 5.
Yeah, exactly. So the situation is kind of continuing to evolve, and I wonder, because yesterday when we looked at this data, and last time we kind of commented on it, I believe the ratio was about 35. Before that, it was 40. So yeah, we're kind of undulating between that. One of the interesting things that kind of the penny that dropped for me is when you look at these numbers, they're new builds. Each and every one of these corresponds to someone building something and pulling stuff in. This isn't inclusive of stuff that isn't in flight. So it kind of gives you a global temperature of this is new software that's still being built with these arguably vulnerable bits and pieces inside of it, which is kind of pretty chilling when you think about it.
It could in fact be somewhat worse than that. Hate to be the party pooper, but we know that many CD systems that we've seen, especially cloud types of systems, download their dependencies directly from Central to drop onto the system. We know this because we've been flooded by those requests before, from a cloud image or something like that.
I can't confirm. We've been trying to figure out where these downloads are coming from, but I would be surprised if a chunk of those weren't coming from some type of automated systems, which then kind of leads you to that visibility may not be just applications being built, but applications still being deployed with those, which is worse. Right. So that's why, the Sonatype data teams are really looking into a lot more of what we can tell to piece together, and it's a little bit challenging because there's a number of different build systems. There are things that are not build systems. They're making requests of the repository, and we're trying to look at the behavior and back it up into some kind of logic about what's happening. With known things like Maven and Gradle, we can kind of figure out the relationship between requests, but not all of them. And not all of the tools provide user agents either. So, there's big spikes of downloads in here that have the user agent. So it's anybody's guess what the heck is going on there, right? So all of that we're trying to figure out because we want to figure out how can we bend the curve, in a way that doesn't create more harm than good. And there have been conversations about what can be done to slow or tar pit these legacy requests. There are active conversations ongoing, and it's something that sounds simple on its face, but not always. Because if you imagine an organization, many organizations, some of our customers have, 50,000, 100,000 applications. And if they've triaged and they're prioritizing the remediation on the ones that are the most at risk with the most to lose and or don't have other compensating mechanisms, if all of a sudden we went and blew up the rest of that portfolio that is already deemed to be not a big problem, now we take their attention away from fixing the most important things to fixing things that might have been, relatively speaking, unimportant, right? So, so we have a lot of responsibility to be careful here, not to accidentally, drown the patient, because it sounded like a simple way to fix it.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's been a lot of conversation actually around not kind of losing sight of the real problem at hand, which ultimately still is the pretty significant RCEs that kind of exist in 2.x all the way to 2.15 now. And I think that's kind of one of those things that we were kind of hyper conscious at the moment. Is really, it's very easy now to get caught up in, hey, there's another RC, there's another CV here, there's another blogging framework that's affected. But most of these, they're important, but they're not as important as this, right? Which is evidenced by these attacks, these confirmed breaches that are now starting to come out.
Yeah, and sometimes there are contradictions in the advisory. Like I've been seeing some reports saying Log4j API is also vulnerable. It's not by itself. Like our security research team, that's why they've been looking at each and every component, right? That even sounds familiar to Log4j.
So I don't know, Axe, if you've seen any indications of these new, let's call them variants, of being actually exploited in the wild. My observation is that these additional, attack vectors are coming in from researchers who are looking in other directions, which are good. But my hunch is that the majority of the exploits that are happening are of the alpha variant. And as these statistics show, there's still a significant usage of that in the world that are, quote, unvaccinated to that particular, to any of these attacks, right?
I'd agree with that.
Go ahead.
I'd agree with that because the DOS vector, it's more like doing your due diligence, right? Because if you looked at the CV that's been patched in 2.16, it's like exploitable under very, very specific circumstances to cause a DOS. I think the RC angle, though, and the bypass, which happened in 2.15, those are more serious things to focus on.
So, hey, there was one other thing that I found really interesting, actually, in the dashboard, Brian. And that was just the country by country statistics, because I can't help but to kind of ask out loud, are we starting to feel like patching fatigue at this stage? We're 11, 12 days into this effort. And, one of the things that really strikes me quite a lot is when I look at that country dispersion list. So that, kind of the competitive vaccination chart, if you will. It's really just interesting to me how in some places, the news got percolated pretty fast. It went, it's inching kind of steadily towards that sort of 80% rate. But then there are other countries that kind of crash and burn quite heavily. And then there's obviously one at the bottom.
I don't know what's unique about Taiwan, but it's hard to see on the map here. But since we first started looking, the Taiwan consumption of the vulnerable versions has been through the roof. It's 87%. And we eliminated, all the countries that had very low utility, low downloads, because it was creating a lot of noise in the charts. So there is significant usage here, and it is almost all of it the vulnerable versions, right? So that's why I'm wondering if there's some kind of automation that's going on there that just keeps downloading from Central over and over again. But there are some bright spots in some countries that are kind of doing a better job than others. So it's interesting. It's hard to make decisions about it, but we included it because we thought it is kind of interesting to take a look at how the patterns might be different in different countries, and then try to work back and figure out why might that be, and what could we do about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good chart. It shows you just how quickly people have responded and moved from 0 to high numbers. But as you say, right, it has these. It's also some of these charts indicate that some people are treating this vulnerability just like, quotes, any other vulnerability, and they're updating and they're letting their CI/CD systems do it and all that stuff, where others appreciate the danger and are working really hard to get it fixed. And I think some of those charts represent those different views, as to what people are doing. The Taiwan thing, though, that is peculiar. So as you say, it probably indicates that for whatever reason, there are people pulling down lots and lots of the old versions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the final kind of, as I was looking at these numbers this morning and sharing on Twitter, the penny dropping for me is, we feel exhausted by this, I think, as an industry. Those of us that have been living and breathing this for a long time, I mean, it kind of feels like, Log4j, old news, schnews. But when you look at these diagrams, I think we're barely at the majority of the new adopters, let alone even thinking about what the legacy application stack looks like at most organizations. Like you said, Brian, we're talking tens, possibly even hundreds of thousands of applications per organization that now have to be rolled through. So I think like the damning kind of chilling number as we kind of head into what is arguably quite a big holiday period in the Western world, with a lot of days off for a lot of people, is that there's this huge amount of estate still out there. Clearly, no progress is happening on that. And possibly, my kind of conclusion is, I wonder whether or not the people that represent that 40% have even heard the news. Maybe they heard the first set of news, but whether or not they've actioned it or not is a different thing.
Yeah, I think you're right. This the bit that is concerning is, as we go into the holidays, that there are going to be servers out there that are very vulnerable, and the patching is going to get delayed. So not a cheery thought.
Well, I guess the cheery silver lining in all of this is just the adoption curve. Like even 2.17, it came out on Friday night. It's been growing quite steadily, taking ground, and 2.15, when you look at it split wise now, seems to be on its way out, and the people that heard the message were the people that downloaded it in the first place. So luckily there is progress, and as you said, Brian, it's a steady increase. Well, we've kind of come through the top of the hour. So much to talk about every time that we go into this. So why don't we wrap this up with just quick thoughts on kind of, what do I do? I'm someone listening in. Where do I focus? Do I continue steady on patching, finding, and what's our commitment as an upstream entity to continue on this?
I would personally say yes, definitely upgrade to the latest 2.7. That's the safest version to be on. Although the DOS flaw discovered in 2.16, it's seemingly minor, but it's been rated a high. So just so you can sleep at night, just upgrade. Secondly, also adopt some like Sigma rules or something, like some that your IDS IPS systems can just detect these payloads, because you'll be surprised. Even like average blogs and websites are being targeted. If you run a news blog or something, you'll see these JNDI payloads coming in. So if you could like set up a honeypot maybe or something similar, where all this, payload could go, you could analyze the attack better, catch it before it spreads. So that's sort of the advice from, network admins and stuff.
Yeah, but 217, definitely go to 217. We're talking logging. We're talking about something that, however much we've got patches here, Log4j has been around for a long time. It's very tested by many, many people. So the risk is very low and the benefits are so high. So go to 217.
Yeah, and I would, just to avoid repeating, I think I would take a look at your dependency usage. If you're using Maven, you can use a dependency tree plugin to get a visualization of that. So while you should have updated and maybe overridden transitive dependencies so that you're packaging and shipping the latest Log4j, if you're seeing some of your direct dependencies that are still trying to pull in the vulnerable version, go start to put pressure on those projects to update. As we've been doing some of the analysis, there are a lot of pretty high-profile projects who have not actually published a release yet, and we believe that that's contributing to a massive amount of these vulnerable downloads. And so we're going to start surfacing that soon as a way of shining a light on that and kind of try to get those projects to make those changes. But you can start doing that now. It's hard to believe that there might be maintainers out there who aren't aware, but there clearly are, right? So
Definitely are.
Really a coordinated effort that we have to push across all of these different dimensions. Push on your vendors, push on your open source projects that you're consuming. Make sure that they know, ask them their plans. When are you going to patch this, right? I have this feeling that the seriousness of this is not shared as broadly as it should be.
Yeah,
No,
but
So
I could say, having said all that, a lot of these projects, they're open source projects, they're done by volunteers. So the other thing you could do is literally contribute a fix.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
Help them. Yeah.
And another thing to say is not just central and pure Maven packages either that have this, right? It's repackaged in all manner of ecosystems. And Log4j it probably is bundled into a ton of stuff in all the other ecosystems as well. So this isn't just a Java concern either. It is a true software ecosystem effort that we're. Well, with that thought, then let's call it here. Thank you very, very much, Axe, Steve, and Brian, for joining us here today. And we'll come back with you next time when we have some updates.
Thanks, everyone.